And so got to remember to do my introductions at the beginning here. I'm Anna, and this is the Yarn Randomizer podcast. And if you've been watching, great. Welcome back. If you're new, I hope you enjoy this. The main thing here is I do something a little different in that I choose yarns randomly from my stash as far as picking out next projects in general and stuff, and we'll get into that as I show what I'm working on and everything. And so welcome, and like and subscribe if you like this, and let's just get right down to it. All right, first thing always is what I'm wearing, and so I have to own that I'm on the ranunculus bandwagon that I made. So I made this ranunculus last year, and it just turned out so nice. It's an interesting pattern. And again, everything will be linked below as far as the projects, my yarns, the patterns, and everything else. But there's a story behind this yarn. So my husband is an avid motorcycler. He rides, he goes on little trips where he goes out camping and stuff like that with his motorcycle. And so we started to joke that as he went riding different places, he could stop at yarn shops and find yarn for me on these trips. And so this yarn here came from a small shop in Georgia. So he was riding down there, and I love to imagine him walking into this shop fully geared with his jacket and his pants and his boots and everything else, and going in and asking about buying yarn. And so this is from, I believe, a little place called Silver Thread and Golden Needles, and this is their their yarn. It's a sport weight, and it's 100% merino, and this colorway is called pokeberry, which is completely appropriate. Is if you know what pokeberries are and stuff, this color will ring a bell for you. And so what happened was he bought me 2 skeins of this. Now this is a sport weight, and it came picked in my randomizer last year, and I think originally I had planned on making some shawl or something with it. It was 600 yards, but after watching a lot of the Little Big Knits and also I think Finished Knitting Stories, I'll link these 2 podcasts below. I had seen their ranunculus sweaters and really thought they were neat. And as I think, as they mentioned, if you look at the picture on the pattern page for the ranunculus, you might be like, it doesn't look too interesting, but you would be surprised. Well, as you can tell, it ends up being, it's just a nice simple circular yoke. And the thing with this pattern is you take yarn, I think most folks do a fingering and a mohair to make this, similar to what you would do with a love note. In this case, I had the sport weight and I had just 600 yards, but based on what I saw in the pattern, I could squeak out a sweater. And I thought I'd take a chance on it. I'd never done it before, and it's done on large needles. And so I have, it's normally done on 10. I have to do it on 10.5 to get gauge. And so I made the sweater in basically 7 days. Was able to get it, and you can see I got little kind of short sleeves I was able to do. And I think it's about 11 inches from the underarm on the side, so it's fairly cropped. So I basically wear it like a slip-over or vest and stuff, but I absolutely love it. The drapiness of the fabric is wonderful, and the result is just so nice, and it's definitely something that's going to get made again when the appropriate yarn comes kind of popping out of my Yarn Randomizer choices. But yeah, and so it's just great. And so this sweater means a lot to me because my husband picked up this yarn for me down there in Georgia while he was on his motorcycle tour. So that's it for what I'm wearing today. And then let's see, so let's go through the standard progression. I actually do have a finished object, which I'm really excited about. And so one of the things I wanted to do was make sure I was pronouncing these. This is the Yanagi socks. I'll finally actually say it correctly in the podcast. And this is a free pattern, which is really cool. And the socks just turned out amazing. So these are socks with a really neat detail, and that is not a cable. That is a sequence of yarn overs. You can see the yarn overs there, and there's reductions there. On the left sock, it's knit two together. On the right sock, it's slip, slip, knit. And you just use, and it's ribbing in here. So you use this combination of yarn overs and decreases in this ribbing to get this kind of flowing detail, which looks really great. And it's asymmetrical, so it's only on one side of the foot. So if you look at the inside of the socks, there's nothing there. You look at the outside, you see the pattern. Now these socks were really nice. They've worked up really nicely. They've got an eye of partridge heel flap, and you can see the gusset here, and you can see how nicely, I've blocked these already. You can see how nicely, as you do these decreases up here, this is toe up, you can see how nicely that comes together and kind of consumes the gusset. And additionally, I want to show what I do. So the one modification I made to the pattern is that I like doing what I've seen a couple other sock pattern authors do on these toe-up socks, and that is knit together a stitch from the instep from the front of the sock with the side stitch from the back as you're getting rid of the heel flap and coming up to help eliminate the possibility of a gap here. So you can see how nicely that comes out. You really don't have a gap on the sock as a result right here. And I think the other thing I would say about these socks is that you can see this is using German short rows here, and it's a fairly generous heel. And so if you're somebody with a large instep, these are going to work out really nicely for you. I know some folks have trouble wearing socks where the heels are only made with short rows if they don't add some extra in for this area of the foot. And so this is a great pattern, just a wonderful free pattern, really well done. I've put in my notes how I finished up the top of the heel flap. So if you want to do that, and even the detail, let's see if you can see it. The detail, even here on the top, the author's gone to the trouble of having these ribs feed right into the ribs of the cuff of the sock. And I used, I think, Judy's Magic Cast Off Stretchy Bind Off. I'll have to take a look at that. But that ended up, you notice there's really not much of a flare. It's a little bulkier, but it feels nice and sturdy, and it stretches really nicely. The socks fit great. And I'm trying to think of any other detail on here. Oh, and I used to do, I'm going to say Jody, somebody's cast on for toe-up socks, but now I do the Turkish cast on for toe-up socks because it's like magic, and I feel like it's easier. I don't have to remember how to do that cast on or ever remind myself. It's so simple and produces such a good result. You know, it just looks like your standard toe-up cast on, invisible. You can't see that anything happened there. And the neat thing about the Turkish cast on, and I will probably make a technique video for this, is if you're going to start with a self-striping yarn or a yarn where you want to start with that's variegated, that you want to start with a specific color right at the toe on a toe-up sock, there's a neat trick you can do with the Turkish cast on where you don't have to make an effort to start there. You can cast on extra stitches to get to the color you want, and then you just drop the stuff you don't need as you work back across. But I'll make a video for that. But yeah, super pleased. This just turned out so nice. And it's Lolo Did It yarn in their original. And that yarn just knit up with such a nice texture. that I'm really kind of sold on the quality of the yarn from Lola Did. It was just really impressed, and this is a great, it was a sock set and came in this combination, and I actually purchased this out of somebody else's stash, and I've been toying with the idea of making some videos related to how do you shop other folks' stashes for yarn that's for sale, and a few other things that might be interesting to show, and we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But that's my only finished object for this time. And see, I don't want to linger too long, but I love the details. I love the details on these things. So, as far as, I have a couple of projects where nothing's really happened yet. The motorcycle sweater for my husband. I have a commitment to myself to start charging myself knitting tax on the 13th. And on that day, I will start requiring myself to do about half an hour of knitting on that motorcycle sweater each day. And so that will bring it to completion at a date that I should be able to bring it to completion at a date that I have in mind. So that'll come back, and you can see that on my project page. The sweater I'm working on, the Wednesday sweater I'm working on with Lavon, is still kind of waiting. Lavon and I are getting together this coming Monday, and so we'll see where we're at and see if how much progress she's made and if I have to catch up with her and stuff. And so those are yeah, blankets are hibernating. Those two sweaters are kind of waiting. So the next thing, and what I'm doing here is I'm cheating. Instead of wishing I had my phone available, I have an iPad over here that has my project page open right now, so I can see the list of things I want to go through. So the next thing is, for the past 5 years, so this would be the 6th year I'm doing it, I've been doing Jimmy Bean's Wool annual shawl. They have an annual kind of monthly shawl where they send you 80 yards of yarn a month, and they have instructions, and you knit, and at the end of the, after 12 months, you've finished a shawl that's ready to block. And it's really kind of neat because you get this little treat in the mail, a little ball of yarn. It used to be, it was originally a mystery knit along, no longer. You see what it looks like, you get to pick. They have usually a couple of color choices available. And you just kind of get this ball of yarn each month, towards the end of the month, generally for the shawl club. They have some other clubs as well that mail out at different times. But I do the shawl club each year. And so I got the February yarn right at the end of February. I can't remember if I finished this at the end of February, the beginning of March, but I finished the second month of the shawl. And the interesting thing here is, so this shawl this year is a kind of a rectangular fade that has a little twisted stitch detail. So I don't know if I've gone over this shawl before on the podcast, but it's made in La Biename, their merino single, which is just and merino singles are almost always just fantastic yarn anyway, but this one is really nice. And the first colorway, you can see it's curling up. I'm hoping with blocking this will behave a little better. But the first colorway is Yellow Brick Road, and the second colorway is Yellow Brick Road Graffiti. So it's got a little bit of these dark areas in there, and it's a slightly different shade from the first month. But I think each month it's going to be pretty much be the same. You start and you have a traveling stitch that's going up that you actually move on the front and the back rows, surrounding a reverse stockinette area and then the stockinette area and a bias edge over here. And you'll notice between the 2 months there is a purl ridge at the row, on the row you're doing the yarn change. So you do a little bit more, that gives you a little bit more of a fade or a transition between the 2 months. So that's how far it is. I usually can get that little, I generally don't use up all 80 yards to do a month. And so it's not like I'm knitting 80 yards in just 2 days, but usually in a day and a half to 2 days, I can knock these out and get the monthly piece done. And so it's kind of a nice, you kind of get this reward at the end of the year, a whole big shawl, when you get these done. And it's not too much of my time out to kind of jump on these and do these each month. And I've really enjoyed them. I've been doing a shawl retrospective. I've been going through I have 38 shawls here. I've made more than 38 shawls, but I have 38 shawls here. And I've gone through the first 10 on one of my little recordings to kind of go through them and lessons learned and that kind of thing. I'm getting ready. I've got the next 10 lined up here on my table, and I'll be recording that sometime soon, probably within the next few days, and get that out there too. And that'll be, yes, there it is right there. There is one of these, the first annual Jimmy Beans shawl that I did is in this next set of 10. And stuff. So it's just one of those fun little treats for myself, you know, get something fun in the mail once a month and you know, actually, to be honest about it, the thing I enjoy the most about it is the collaboration or kind of chatting with all the other folks who are working on the shawl at the same time. I like to help when I can, and I love seeing other people's work, and I enjoy seeing other people being successful in doing these things and enjoying it. And so it's fun to share. And they have a Facebook group and a group on message area on Ravelry for folks to discuss these. And that's always fun. All right. The next object in process, which you guys might have been expecting for me to have finished, but I do not have finished yet because I wanted to get these socks done, and you'll see another cast on that I did where it's kind of like, I probably shouldn't have done the cast on, but I couldn't resist, is my, it's the Lento sweater. I'm so glad I got that up there to cheat with. And so I finished the body of the Lento sweater, which I think I showed last time. And I started on the sleeve. So let's get this out here. Whoop, yarn going everywhere. Let's make sure I get the front to the back. Okay. So there it is again. Oh, the color is just so nice. I really like it. It's this yarnable, hypnotic yarn fingering in Born to Be Mild, which is this neat color with bits of brown and blue and a kind of a cream background. And then with a dark brown mohair, I think from Drops, their kid mohair that I picked up from shop in the UK. Actually, I got a really good deal on that, and they had it on sale, and so I was able to buy some skeins of that. And so I've picked up the sleeve and just kind of started on the sleeve. You can see there. And I'm actually using, although it may not look particularly tidy just yet, I'm using a technique, and I've got it linked in my project page for trying to ensure that I don't have any big gaps down here, but we'll see how successful I was at executing that when I get this done. But yeah, so making progress, and I divided up. So what I did was I knit the sweater as long as I wanted it to be. I tend to like about a 13-inch length from the arm to the bottom edge, which comes down to about my hip bone. And then I took what was left of the fingering yarn and I weighed it and divided it up into 2 remaining balls. I just basically put a clip or tied a knot right at the center between the last 2, dividing the ball in half that was left. And my idea is to make the sleeve as long as possible with what I have left, that half of what I have left, and we'll see where that gets me. I'm hoping it's at least an elbow sleeve, but we'll find out. And so yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun with this, and the result is nice. And I'll probably be concentrating on this pretty heavily outside my knitting tax, because the socks were Yarn Randomizer project number 1 for the year, and this is Yarn Randomizer project number 2. So again, a little progress, but I expect that to be finished for the next podcast. And let's see, so that's that, the Lento. Now the next one is I'm working on a shawl called Swanky Chic. And I'm using a set of yarn from Les Garçons that actually came out for, it was Christmas 2021, and then they had a cowl that you could start in January 2022, and I decided not to do the cowl. It was a nice design and everything, but just, again, I'm more of a shawl wearer, less of a cowl wearer, although I do have some cowls I can show off at some point. But I did not quite progress to my next color, but I did make it into the lace in the main color on the shawl. So now you can see this is almost a full complete progression in one color. So you start with the stripes, a little bit of the Surrey alpaca, one of the minis here has the lace pattern, the alpaca again, and now the main color in the same lace pattern. And you can see it's an extremely simple lace pattern. It has a really nice texture to it. And so now I just have got to finish this. I think I have about maybe 8 rows to go on this lace section. I'll do some more Surrey, and then a stripe section will come up that brings in the next mini. And I've balled that mini up. I think it's Vincent loves his neutrals or something like that. So here's the next mini that'll be going in. And I guess my only issue is it's not it's a little bit of a contrast. So there's a bit of a difference between it and the Surrey. And so we'll see how it looks. But I'm dead set on using every ball of yarn that came in that set in this shawl. So we're going to see how long I can get it. So this is one section, there'll be a total of 8 sections like this for the entire shawl. So it should be reasonably long. And so I'll get some work. I'll get into the next color, see if I can get the next 2 sets of this lace pattern done so you can see the next contrast kind of color in there for the next time. So, but that's fun to work on. It's nice because it's actually so simple. It's just some garter ridges, garter stripes, and a very simple lace. And so it's just a nice way to use up some minis and everything. The pattern was not written to use the minis. It's written to do 2 skeins of fingering and 1 skein of mohair. I'm using the Surrey, and I've had to make an adjustment using the Surrey to use, you're supposed to do 4 garter ridges between each section, and in some areas I'm only doing 3 garter ridges in order to conserve on the Surrey since it's less yardage. But normally what's going on here is you'd be using the same pair of colors for each section and doing the total, I think a total of around 6 to 7 sections in the main pattern for the shawl. But I figured it was a perfect way to use up some minis. And so I'm going to use this set. I'm using this set for that. So I'll keep showing you my progress on that. And then the next thing is I did cast on a muscle burrow, and what I like to do is always have like one cast on in kind of each category: a sweater, a hat, socks, a shawl, along those lines. But you'll get to see that I cheated a little bit here. But so I do have a muscle burrow on the needles, and where have I got that tucked away? Ah, right here. Okay. Now this is in this Blue Barn fiber. I'm probably a little bit more than a third of the way with this muscle burrow hat, and isn't that just lovely? I'm so happy with this yarn. So this is Blue Barn fiber in the colorway September Aspen, and I think last time I said I think of this as snow between the colors, but really if you think about it, this is the bark, with the little dark specks on it, and then leaves are a reminiscent of the color September, kind of autumn colors for the aspen. So September Aspen. And coincidentally, because of the number of stitches I'm doing in the round here for my muscle burrow hat, I'm getting striping. So I've got a spiral stripe running the way down, and I'm hoping that will continue all the way down and see how that turns out. So I'm continuing to work on that, but it's really just such a beautiful color. And the way you can see there's a picture of the yarn in my stash. If you go to my project page, you can look at I always take photographs of all my yarn for my stash, and you can see what this yarn looked like. It basically was a speckled yarn with kind of color concentrated at one end. It reminds me of those colorways that they're doing the pooling on purpose with now, that you see patterns doing that, and I bet you could do that with this yarn as well. but I'm happy with the hat. So that's the progress on the muscle burrow. So then I'll show you my misbehavior next. I am, even though, so I tell people about how I do the yarn randomizer. I pick yarns using these little wooden chips that you see at the beginning of the video. And I'll show a couple of these wooden chips because I got a couple more picks to go over. And so I have Yarn Randomizer projects numbered on my queue. My queue always reflects reality, and that is, it's got the Yarn Randomizer picks there. But there's no rules about jumping the queue. So I can jump the queue. And I want to talk about another pick that's on my queue that I've talked about before, but I've changed my mind about it. So we'll get to that. But my next work in progress is something where I jump the queue because I just couldn't resist trying out the Sophie scarf because they're just so interesting. You see folks showing these off. They look like a really quick knit. And I just wanted to try it out. And I knew I could probably knit it pretty quickly. So I started it yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Might have been the day before yesterday. Maybe the day before yesterday. But just very recently. And let me grab that. There it is. And this, as it turns out, is in another Yarnable, our Hypnotic Yarns colorway called Raspberry Cream. And it's got these really just, see the raspberry color there, and it's got this almost brownish, reddish color in there as well. Just really pretty. And then here is, see, I'm trying to think, is this the front? It doesn't really matter. But here's my progress so far. I'm basically about almost halfway through the skein. Now that's doing more, that's making it a little longer than what the pattern says. So I'm up to, I think, around 37 stitches across. So I'm about 4 more stitches across than the pattern originally calls for. But I decided to go ahead and just try to use up as much yarn as possible. So I'm actually at, I think there's about 59 grams of the yarn left with this amount of progress. And you can see, I think it a little more than wraps around once. And so this will wrap around twice, and I think have a little bit of a tie. Now I'm also a tight knitter. I'm using needle size 5, which is a size larger than what's called for in the pattern. And I'll definitely block it for length and everything, but the result is really nice. And you'll see my markers along the edge. I'm just marking the 5th increase, every 5th increase, so I can easily count up the stitches. And one of the things I want to show you that I noticed as I'm doing this pattern is that, so this stitch marks an increase row, and now there's a 1, 2, 3, 4th, that's another increase row. But you'll notice, let's see if we can see this well enough, you'll notice that the stitch from the row, the 3rd row right before the 4th row, is a little snugger than the other stitches along this I-cord edge here where you're doing the increases. And the reason for that is because when you make that increase, you're doing a knit in the front and back of the stitch from the 3rd row, which reduces the amount of yarn that's in that stitch. And so that's why you have a tendency to see that slightly snugger stitch every so often corresponding to the 3rd row right before the increase row. I've been kind of interested in how increases work, and definitely on socks when I do increases. Sometimes I don't do the make one left and make one right because of that effect. How they do a similar thing. They scavenge yarn from the adjacent stitches in the row below, and frequently, particularly on raglan sweaters, you'll see that'll be pronounced as far as how it's doing that. And you use those types of increases frequently on raglan sweaters that are done top down. My plan is to do a video where I do a comparison of 3 approaches, so what the make one left and right looks like when you're doing a raglan increase, but also doing two varieties of yarn over, and then on the next row using that yarn over strand just the same way you would use a make one left, make one right, picking up the strand. But instead, you have the yarn over strand, which gives you a little more slack and should, in theory, distort the stitches in that previous row less as a result. And you can make that yarn over longer or shorter depending on how you wrap it and what your fabric is. So I'm going to sketch that out and try to get that video done probably after the next shawl retrospective and get that out there. So, but yeah, so far really fast, really easy. I expect to get this done in the next day or so, and I'll have a finished object to show off next time. I'll wear it. So that's all my works in progress. Let's see, now let's take a quick look at my notes. All right. Oh, okay, so the next thing is I did pick a couple more, have my husband, because I don't do this, I present my husband with my jar of wooden chips and have him pull numbers for Yarn Randomizer picks. And so this is where things get interesting. So I had him pull a number, and so the next Yarn Randomizer number is 103. Now 103, as it turns out, in my spreadsheet, corresponds to this Drops Kid Silk. And this is more of the Kid Silk. When I picked it up on sale, I bought a lot. I bought a bunch of it from Wool Warehouse in the UK because they had a sale where I was only paying like about $3 US per skein because it was so inexpensive. I'm just trying to think. What had happened was I wanted to get some mohair after making this ranunculus and being so excited about it and looking at fingering weight yarns in my stash. I thought, ooh, I want to do more of that. And I thought I should, for some of these yarns where I have around 1,000 yards of it or 2 skeins and stuff or whatever, I should buy some mohair to go with that. But mohair can be a little pricey. And so I thought, I started looking around out of curiosity for this Drops Kid Silk, which was being used a lot. And I found a place that was selling it reasonably inexpensively on Etsy, but I continued to look around and then I found it at Wool Warehouse. And not only did I find it, but at the moment that I found it, it was on sale for a really good price. So I bought 4 skeins in probably 4 different colors, the brown, this gray, and another one to go with some yarn that I have in stash. So that's where this comes from. And I have 4 skeins of this. Now I bought this specifically to be paired with. And so part of my doing my Yarn Randomizer is a yarn gets picked. Obviously I don't have to just work with this yarn. I can combine any other yarn from my stash. I have to work with this yarn, but it can go with anything else in my stash. Well, I had bought this specifically to go with this yarn. Now you're going to see there's no labels on this yarn. And this was some yarn, and I actually got 2 skeins of it that I got from Jimmy Bean's Wool, and these are big skeins. I got this from Jimmy Bean's Wool maybe last year or the year before, and one of their sales I spotted some yarn on sale, and it was a good deal. These are was it Madeline Tosh sock sport weight, and I'll link this down there. It's a discontinued yarn, which is probably part of the reason it was on sale. They sent me 2 skeins of it, no labeling whatsoever, but it's actually 400 yards a skein. These are significantly larger than a regular skein of yarn. So it's about 400 yards per skein. These are almost 200 gram skeins, and so 800 yards. And it was listed as sport. So I thought, I could combine that with a mohair and make a sweater. And so the trick will be finding a sweater to make this with, but it's more complicated than that. And so this is one of the reasons I want to make a video. I think I've settled on, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So one of the interesting things about this yarn is these are about 200 grams with around 400 yards in here. So this yarn is running around, it's a little bit more, let's see, something a little over 200 and something yards per 100 grams. So this is actually running in length per weight more like a DK. Now, I looked at the yarn information page and you see the same comment repeatedly from folks making comments on this yarn. This knits up more like a DK. And I could probably, I didn't think about doing this, but I could get my little wraps per inch tool and look at how many wraps per inch that this yarn does. But fundamentally, the more you read about this yarn and what people have done with it and kind of what's going on, even though this is listed as a sport, it really knits up as DK. So that kind of changed my plans a little bit. I originally had thought about making another ranunculus or a love note, but this is already DK weight without the mohair being combined into it. So I went looking around and now searching for patterns to use on Ravelry. There are a bunch of different strategies for doing that, and what I want to do is make a little video that goes through kind of that exploration, how you go searching, you have a yarn, and how you go searching for something to do with that yarn, depending on the yarn's weight, depending on what people have made with the yarn, depending on if you want to combine it with another yarn, and kind of what weight that should be. And there's all kinds of little tricks you can do on Ravelry to take a look at that. I'm pretty sure I've settled on doing a Felix, either cardigan or a pullover with the gray. So it'll be a nice gray pullover, but I'm not 100% sure yet. So I think as far as making a little video about how to use Ravelry to find a project for yarn, I'll record the process of doing that for this yarn. So you will not see this in my queue yet, or I'll put it in the queue just as the yarn and not associated with the pattern. So you'll see it waiting there. So yeah, so this is exciting. So this will be fun. This will knit up in combination with this mohair into a nice kind of gray sweater. That should look pretty good. Okay, and so that brings me to, where do I have it over here? There, I thought I had brought that over here. Let's check really quick. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the other thing was I had another ball of yarn. Now this is it skeined up, and this is a Black Cat Fibers yarn, Eye of Sauron. So everybody knows Lord of the Rings, knows what that reference is, but Eye of Sauron, and it's this really neat gray and black, and it's got these pops of red and yellow in there, and it's a really nifty looking yarn. And I had originally committed to making a pair of plain socks with this. And since I'd finished my previous pair of socks, I normally would have gone ahead and cast this on, but you know, the other trick you can do with Ravelry is look at what other people have made with a colorway, a very specific colorway of a yarn. So you can go take a look at what people have made. And again, I'll probably make a little short or something to show you how to do that. And I looked at the socks that were made with this, and they were cool, pretty neat. They mainly, a lot of them ended up with micro striping, and depending on the size, some people had some really pronounced flashing that was going on with it, or pooling, some really interesting pooling. But you know, I just did that sweater retrospective, and you know, I was talking about how I'd made the hitchhiker on needles called for, and I really should be knitting it on larger needles since I'm a tight knitter. And I thought about the really cool pooling that happens in that shawl. I'm looking at this yarn and looking at what people were getting for results, and I'm thinking that I'm going to switch this to a hitchhiker. So I think I'm going to switch it to a hitchhiker in my queue and make another hitchhiker shawl out of this. And we'll see how that turns out. And that will be a little while before I start that. But I didn't have any other yarn selections from my randomizer that would lend themselves to making a pair of socks. And I'm needing to cast on another pair of socks. And so I know luck is with me as far as making a pick, because the majority of my yarn is sock yarn. That's over there. I think 100 and, I don't know, however much, an embarrassing number of skeins of stock yarn over there, and sock yarn leftovers and whatever else. And that lets you see kind of how I organize things. So I had my husband pull another number, and he got the number 246. And that corresponded to some Peyton's Croy. So let's see. And it wasn't a full skein. It was a leftover skein that I'd use as contrast heel, toe, and cuff in another pair of socks. So now what I want to do, so this is how the skein was stored in my boxes over there. All my yarn is in Ziploc bags, just so you know, individual, like usually sets of 4 skeins, around 4 skeins, or sometimes more, in Ziploc bags in there. And in fact, I need to do a stash toss soon to do an inspect. I do twice a year, as Stephanie Pearl McPhee recommends. I do a twice a year stash toss to make sure I inspect all my yarn, look at all my bags, make sure it's organized, and make sure there's no issues there. Gotta keep an eye out for those wool moths. So this is how I put away leftovers of a skein. So I think you can see right there, Peyton's Croy sock yarn, and this is gray marl. There's about 60 yards left here. So that should be enough for some toes and heels, I think, in a pair of socks. The question is what to use it with. Now, the funny thing about Peyton's Croy is, even though it says it's fingering, although maybe, I don't know if it still says it's fingering on Ravelry, but it's, you know, classified as a sock yarn, but it's really more sport. It's more sport weight. So I have more Peyton's Croy, and I decided, I looked to see, and I think it will match sufficiently with these 2 balls of Peyton's Croy. So I'll make a pair of socks, and this colorway is, I think it's green marl, green striped rag, excuse me. Yeah, green striped rag. And so that I'll use this for the heels and toes. So let me open that up instead of continuing to crinkle the bag. So I think, I actually looked, some people have actually used these 2 yarns together in some socks. I think it looks okay. May not, I'll think about it, but I think it'll be okay. Now, the other thing, again, I'm getting off on all kinds of tangents here, but it's just because I've used so many of these yarns before. Now, the nice thing with these, this is Croy socks. Notice it's Croy socks, and it's this green striped rag. And even though skeins may not start at the same point in the rag kind of striping that's going on in these balls, they will have repeat. And you can make identical socks, not just fraternal twins, but you can actually make identical socks with Croy socks. Now, I know I'm probably hearing other people going like, wait a minute. Now, there is another type of Croy yarn called, I think, Croy Socks FX. And I have knit socks with FX. And FX is an interesting yarn. It kind of varies over time by strands of this yarn varying over that. And there's, I should bring out a pair of, I can show you, I'll link a project in my projects where I've knit with Croy Socks FX, and it produces fraternal twin socks. There was no finding a repeat in that, because of the way the color changes over the skein. Isn't predictable like these are. Pretty certain these are, because I looked at some socks made of these. But I'll link that other pair, and you can see how the color shifts over time. And I think actually in the project I show how the color changes they vary one strand at a time through the skein, and it produces a less predictable pattern. So I just be cautious. If you're wanting to make a pair of identical striped socks out of Croy, you'll want to be careful to just make sure it's Croy socks, and if it's Croy FX, you may not be able to. I can't swear you can't, but more than likely you're going to get fraternal twins instead of identical socks. Okay, so I think those are the next randomizer numbers. So acquisitions, no yarn has come in. No, I haven't made any purchases. I was tempted. I was shopping some folks' stash on Ravelry and saw some very tempting deals there, and I'll probably make a video related to doing that, how you do that. But I do have an acquisition that's not yarn, and I thought I'd show that off. And so I got a Black Pearl Magic sweatshirt. And I got it, I don't have very many sweatshirts. I think they had a choice between a gray and this beige kind of color, and I really like the beige. And so I picked up one of her sweatshirts, and I do have one of her bags, and I highly recommend her bags. So embarrassingly enough, I have the biggest bag she makes, which is called a big ass bag. And currently I have a sweater project that I'm working on with Levon in that bag, or at least part of it. But if you have not seen these bags, and this one's absolutely comically huge, it's just wonderfully huge. But they're just so neat. You can see the glittery details, the detail of the very bright zipper, and just very well made. And even the zipper pull has a cool color to it, and it's got some handles so you can carry it. And so really, her work is really wonderful, and I can highly recommend it. I'll link to her page below, but I couldn't resist getting the sweatshirt. And it's nice to get one. I have so many hoodies, and so it was nice to get a nice sweatshirt that wasn't a hoodie to get. So that's my only acquisition. And now let's see if there's anything else. Oh, okay. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to go over. I'm going to be doing my next shawl retrospective soon, within the next few days, because I've got it all lined up here. And I may think of a way to kind of at least give you some detail, some kind of recording related to the stash toss when I do my stash toss, because I know at least one person's asked about seeing my stash. It's all right there, back there in the closet. Actually, can I shift you back over that way a little bit? You see all those boxes back there. And so, yep, although you also see my motorcycle helmets up in the top of the closet there. But that is the entirety of my stash. And all but one of those boxes is yarn. One of them is sweaters. So it's the way I store some of my sweaters there. And you can see some of my sweaters on the chair here as well. And as well as my mom's artwork on the wall. And that's actually one of my mom's chairs as well. It used to be in one of her art studios, and it's covered with all kinds of random paint. Maybe I'll take a nice picture of it someday. But yeah, so I think that's everything, and I think I've gone on for a while. And so that's enough for this. About every other week I'll be doing this. And so thanks for joining me if you lasted this whole time. And please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and enjoy your knits.